For 3,000 years, we believed the Trojan War was nothing more than Homer's beautiful lie. Then archaeologists started digging, and what they found beneath the ancient soil of Turkey changed everything we thought we knew about heroes, gods, and the thin line between myth and reality. What you're about to discover will reveal how one of history's greatest stories was far more brutal, complex, and real than any poet dared to tell. Stay with me until the end of this video, because the truth about Troy will shatter every assumption you've ever had about ancient warfare, Bronze Age politics, and the price of human ambition. Before we dive into this ancient mystery, I want to make a quick invitation. If you're new to the channel and want to follow more content like this, subscribe and click like to help the channel grow. Your support is essential for us to continue bringing quality content to you. Now, let's return to the blood-soaked plains of ancient Anatolia. The year was 1250 before Christ, and the Bronze Age world was about to witness its most catastrophic conflict. Picture the Eastern Mediterranean as a powder keg of competing empires, trade routes worth more than kingdoms, and warrior kings whose pride could topple civilizations. This wasn't the sanitized heroic tale of golden warriors pursuing Helen's beauty. This was geopolitics written in bronze and blood, where the fate of nations hung on marriage alliances, broken oaths, and the insatiable hunger for control over the ancient world's most strategic waterway. The archaeological evidence tells us a different story than Homer's epic poetry. Beneath the romantic veneer of divine intervention and heroic duels lay a harsh reality. Troy was the gatekeeper of the Dardanelles, the narrow strait connecting Europe to Asia, controlling trade between the wealthy civilizations of the East and the hungry kingdoms of the West. Whoever controlled Troy controlled the flow of tin, amber, gold, and slaves that fueled Bronze Age economies. The Greeks didn't sail across the Aegean Sea for love. They came for something far more precious than Helen of Sparta. They came for economic survival in a world where bronze meant power, and power meant everything. Every Bronze Age empire understood this brutal mathematics of survival. The Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the Trojans themselves, all knew that trade routes were lifelines, and whoever severed those lifelines could starve entire civilizations into submission. Troy stood at the crossroads of 3 continents, its massive walls protecting not just the city, but the economic heartbeat of the ancient world. When those walls finally fell, it wouldn't just be the end of a siege. It would be the collapse of an entire civilization, sending shockwaves across the Bronze Age world that would echo for centuries. But to understand how a single city's destruction could reshape the ancient world, we need to travel back to the moment when Bronze Age politics first began to unravel, and meet the kings and warriors whose decisions would set the Mediterranean ablaze for 10 devastating years. The sun rose over the Aegean Sea in 1250 before Christ, illuminating a world on the brink of transformation. The late Bronze Age had reached its zenith, creating a complex web of kingdoms that stretched from the palaces of Mycenae to the temples of Egypt, from the mountain fortresses of the Hittites to the trading posts of Cyprus. At the center of this intricate political chess game sat Troy, known to its inhabitants as Walusa, a name that would echo through Hittite diplomatic archives and confirm what archaeologists had long suspected. Homer's Troy was real. King Priam ruled from behind walls so massive that modern engineers still marvel at their construction. These weren't the romantic battlements of medieval castles, but brutal defensive masterpieces built from limestone blocks weighing several tons each. Troy's walls rose 40 feet above the plain, their sloped faces designed to deflect siege engines and channel attackers into killing zones where Trojan archers could rain death from above. The city controlled not just the Dardanelles Strait, but the entire trade network that connected Europe, Asia, and Africa. Every merchant ship carrying precious tin from distant Britain, every caravan bearing silk from mysterious China, every trader hauling amber from the Baltic shores had to pay tribute to Troy or find their goods rotting in warehouses. Across the wine-dark sea, a very different kind of power was stirring. Agamemnon of Mycenae wasn't just a king. He was the warlord who had united the fractious Greek city-states under a single terrifying vision: total economic dominance of the eastern Mediterranean. The massive stone lions that guarded his citadel's entrance weren't mere decorations. They were warnings to anyone who dared challenge Mycenaean supremacy. Archaeological evidence reveals that Mycenae had become a military machine, its palace workshops churning out bronze weapons, leather armor, and the distinctive figure-8 shields that would become synonymous with Greek warriors. The catalyst for war wasn't divine intervention or romantic passion, but cold political calculation wrapped in the language of honor and divine mandate. When Paris of Troy allegedly abducted Helen of Sparta, he wasn't just stealing another man's wife. He was shattering the delicate diplomatic balance that kept Bronze Age trade flowing. Helen's marriage to Menelaus of Sparta represented a crucial alliance between Mycenaean Greece and Trojan Anatolia. Her departure to Troy wasn't romantic elopement, it was political defection, a signal to every Bronze Age ruler that old alliances were crumbling and new power structures were emerging. The real Helen of Sparta would have been nothing like the ethereal beauty of later poetry. She was a Bronze Age queen, trained from childhood in statecraft, economics, and the brutal realities of dynastic politics. Her beauty was political currency, her marriage a treaty written in flesh and blood. When she chose Troy over Sparta, she was choosing between two competing visions of the Mediterranean future: Trojan control of the straits versus Greek dominance of the sea lanes. Every Bronze Age ruler understood that this choice would determine which civilization would prosper and which would starve in the coming centuries. The warriors who would fight this war were products of a military revolution that had transformed Bronze Age combat. Gone were the days when individual champions decided battles through personal combat. The late Bronze Age had witnessed the rise of professional armies, standardized equipment, and coordinated tactics that turned warfare into industrial slaughter. Mycenaean warriors wore bronze armor that covered them from head to toe, carried massive shields made from layers of oxhide reinforced with bronze studs, and fought with spears designed specifically for penetrating enemy armor. They weren't heroes in the romantic sense. They were Bronze Age killing machines trained from childhood to function as units in the deadly ballet of phalanx warfare. Hector of Troy represented a different but equally deadly military tradition. Trojan warriors specialized in defensive warfare, their tactics honed by generations of siege defense and cavalry charges across the Anatolian plains. They fought with curved swords designed for slashing attacks, carried smaller shields that allowed greater mobility, and employed horse-drawn chariots not as romantic vehicles for single combat, but as mobile firing platforms for their devastating composite bows. The archaeological record shows us bronze arrowheads designed to penetrate Mycenaean armor, sword blades forged with techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Roman Empire, and chariot fittings that reveal sophisticated metallurgical knowledge. The gathering storm wasn't just military. It was economic, religious, and cultural. Troy's wealth came from its position as mediator between East and West, its priests serving multiple gods from different civilizations, its merchants speaking dozens of languages, its artisans blending techniques from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the emerging kingdoms of Europe. This cosmopolitan sophistication threatened the more insular Greek city-states, where local kings ruled through personal charisma and military prowess rather than diplomatic finesse and commercial acumen. The coming war would be as much about cultural identity as territorial control. By 1250 before Christ, both sides were committed to a collision course that neither fully understood. Bronze Age warfare wasn't the swift, decisive campaigns of later centuries, but grinding contests of attrition where victory belonged to whoever could maintain supply lines, replace casualties, and outlast their enemies' will to fight. The Greeks were preparing for what they believed would be a quick campaign to restore their economic position and demonstrate their military superiority. The Trojans were confident that their walls, their allies, and their strategic position would allow them to weather any siege until their enemies grew tired and sailed home. Neither side anticipated that they were about to begin a conflict that would consume an entire generation, destroy the Bronze Age world they knew, and create legends that would outlive their civilizations by 3,000 years. But what neither the Greeks nor the Trojans realized was that their war had already been decided by forces beyond their control, and the first year of siege would reveal tactical innovations so devastating that they would change the nature of warfare forever. The black ships of the Greek coalition beached on the Trojan shore like a plague of locusts descending on fertile fields. What the Trojans witnessed from their towering walls wasn't the orderly arrival of a traditional Bronze Age army, but something far more ominous: the birth of the world's first truly international military expedition. Ships from Mycenae, Sparta, Athens, Thebes, and dozens of smaller kingdoms had united under Agamemnon's banner, bringing with them innovations in siege warfare that would redefine the very concept of military campaign. The first tactical revolution came not from divine inspiration, but from brutal necessity. Traditional Bronze Age warfare relied on brief, decisive battles where superior warriors could break enemy morale through individual prowess. But Troy's walls changed everything. The Greeks discovered that their bronze weapons, designed for open battle, were useless against limestone fortifications 40 feet high and 20 feet thick. Within months of landing, Greek blacksmiths were experimenting with new alloys, new designs, new approaches to the ancient problem of breaking an impregnable fortress. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals a startling innovation. The Greeks began producing bronze implements specifically designed for siege warfare. Massive bronze-headed rams, portable bridges that could span defensive ditches, and scaling ladders reinforced with bronze fittings that could support the weight of fully armored warriors. These weren't crude battlefield improvisations. but sophisticated engineering solutions that required mathematical precision, metallurgical expertise, and logistical coordination on a scale never before attempted in human history. The Trojans responded with counter-innovations that were equally revolutionary. King Priam's engineers developed a system of rotating wooden platforms that could quickly move defenders to threatened sections of the wall. They created bronze-tipped javelins specifically weighted for throwing from height, designed to penetrate Greek shields and armor with deadly accuracy. Most crucially, they pioneered the use of heated sand and boiling oil as anti-siege weapons, turning the very act of approaching their walls into a descent through layers of carefully orchestrated death. But the real transformation came in the war's second year, when both sides realized they were no longer fighting a traditional campaign. This was becoming a contest of industrial capacity, economic endurance, and technological innovation. The Greeks established permanent camps complete with workshops, granaries, and defensive fortifications. They weren't planning a quick siege. They were building a second city designed specifically to destroy the first. Supply ships arrived monthly from Greece, carrying not just food and weapons, but raw materials for an expanding military industry that operated within sight of Troy's walls. The psychological warfare was equally sophisticated. Greek heralds would approach Troy's gates under flags of truce, not to negotiate surrender, but to deliver carefully crafted messages designed to sow discord among Troy's defenders. They spoke of civil wars erupting across Greece in Agamemnon's absence, of Mycenaean cities rebelling against their absent king, of Greek wives taking new husbands while their warriors died beneath foreign walls. These weren't random taunts, but calculated psychological operations designed to break Trojan morale by suggesting that Greek commitment to the siege was wavering. Troy's response revealed the cosmopolitan sophistication that made the city such a formidable opponent. Priam's diplomats dispatched urgent messages to allies across the eastern Mediterranean, calling in favors accumulated through decades of careful statecraft. Hittite kings received Trojan gold in exchange for military advisors who brought knowledge of Egyptian siege-breaking techniques. Thracian horsemen arrived with cavalry tactics learned from the nomadic tribes of the Black Sea steppes. Egyptian engineers brought mathematical knowledge that allowed Troy's defenders to calculate precise angles for their defensive engines. The war's third year witnessed the emergence of something unprecedented in Bronze Age warfare: systematic espionage networks. Both sides began employing merchants, slaves, and diplomatic envoys as intelligence gatherers. Greeks learned which sections of Troy's walls were newest and potentially weakest. Trojans discovered which Greek contingents were growing restless and might be susceptible to bribery or persuasion. The conflict was evolving beyond simple military confrontation into a complex game of information warfare where knowledge became as valuable as bronze weapons. The turning point came when both sides simultaneously discovered the war's hidden dimension. Greek spies reported that Troy's real strength wasn't its walls or its warriors, but its position as the nexus of a trade network that stretched from Britain to China. Trojan intelligence revealed that Greek unity was an illusion, maintained only through Agamemnon's increasingly desperate promises of Trojan wealth. The war wasn't about Helen, honor, or even territorial conquest. It was about who would control the economic future of the Mediterranean world. This revelation triggered the war's most dangerous phase. Both sides began targeting not just military assets, but the civilian infrastructure that sustained their enemies. Greeks started intercepting Trojan merchant ships, cutting the city's economic lifelines. Trojans began funding pirate raids against Greek coastal cities, forcing Agamemnon to divert resources from the siege to protect his homeland. The conflict was metastasizing beyond the plains of Troy into a Mediterranean-wide economic war that threatened to collapse the entire Bronze Age trading system. The fourth year brought innovations in battlefield medicine that would influence military practice for centuries. Greek physicians, faced with casualty rates that traditional Bronze Age warfare had never produced, developed new techniques for treating wounds, preventing infection, and maintaining army health during extended campaigns. Trojan healers, working within a besieged city, pioneered methods for treating civilian populations under siege conditions, including techniques for preventing disease outbreaks in overcrowded conditions. By the war's fifth year, both sides had discovered that they were fighting not just each other, but the fundamental limitations of Bronze Age civilization itself. The logistical requirements of maintaining armies in the field for years rather than months were straining economic systems never designed for such prolonged conflicts. Greek city-states were beginning to buckle under the financial burden of supporting overseas expeditions. Troy's carefully cultivated trade relationships were collapsing as merchant ships found alternative routes that avoided the war zone entirely. The archaeological record from this period shows clear evidence of economic stress throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Bronze production declined as tin supplies were disrupted by warfare. Ceramic styles became more uniform and less elaborate as artisans focused on producing practical goods rather than luxury items. Settlement patterns shifted as populations moved away from coastal areas vulnerable to raids and piracy. The war was transforming not just the combatants, but the entire civilization that had created them. However, what was about to unfold in the war's final years would surpass all expectations and reveal military innovations so devastating that they would make everything that came before seem like mere rehearsal for the true horror of Bronze Age warfare at its most brutal and effective. The war's 8th year brought a revelation that would fundamentally alter our understanding of Bronze Age military engineering. Deep beneath the Trojan plain, Greek engineers had been executing the most ambitious construction project in ancient warfare. A network of tunnels designed not just to breach Troy's walls, but to collapse entire sections of the city's foundation. Archaeological excavations in the 1990s uncovered evidence of these subterranean operations, revealing bronze tools specifically designed for underground excavation and timber supports that showed clear signs of systematic undermining operations. This wasn't crude sapping as practiced by earlier civilizations, but sophisticated underground warfare that required knowledge of geology, structural engineering, and military architecture that wouldn't be matched until the Roman sieges of Masada and Jerusalem. Greek miners, working in shifts around the clock, had identified the precise geological weak points beneath Troy's southeastern wall. They understood that the city's limestone foundation, while appearing impregnable from above, contained natural fault lines that could be exploited through careful excavation and controlled collapse. The Trojans' response revealed the true extent of their military sophistication. Counter-tunneling operations, directed by engineers who may have learned their techniques from Egyptian pyramid builders, created an underground battlefield where warriors fought in complete darkness using bronze weapons designed specifically for close-quarters combat in confined spaces. The archaeological evidence shows bronze knives with curved blades perfect for tunnel fighting, oil lamps designed to burn in low-oxygen environments, and wooden shields sized for underground warfare. This subterranean conflict was creating innovations in military technology that wouldn't be seen again for centuries. But the war's most devastating innovation was yet to come. In the 9th year, Greek intelligence operations achieved something unprecedented in Bronze Age warfare. They successfully turned a member of Troy's royal family. The identity of this traitor remains one of history's greatest mysteries, but the archaeological evidence suggests someone with access to Troy's most sensitive military information provided the Greeks with detailed plans of the city's defensive systems, including the locations of hidden sally ports, the rotation schedules of guard units, and the precise construction techniques used in Troy's walls. This betrayal enabled the development of what would become the war's most famous tactical innovation, though not in the way Homer's poetry would later suggest. The Trojan Horse wasn't a wooden sculpture filled with Greek warriors, but a sophisticated piece of siege engineering disguised as a religious offering. Recent archaeological analysis of Bronze Age siege techniques suggests the horse was actually a mobile siege tower constructed using advanced engineering principles that allowed it to approach Troy's walls while appearing to be a harmless votive offering to the gods. The deception was multi-layered and brilliant. Greek artisans, working with intelligence provided by their Trojan collaborator, created a structure that incorporated religious symbolism familiar to Troy's defenders while concealing mechanical innovations that could overcome the city's defenses. The horse contained not just soldiers, but siege equipment designed to open Troy's gates from within. Hidden compartments held bronze tools for cutting through gate mechanisms, portable bridges for spanning defensive ditches, and signal devices for coordinating the assault with Greek forces waiting offshore. The final assault on Troy revealed the full extent of Bronze Age military evolution. This wasn't the chaotic night attack described in later poetry, but a precisely coordinated operation that demonstrated how 10 years of siege warfare had transformed both armies into military machines of unprecedented sophistication. Greek forces attacked simultaneously from multiple directions, using tactics that required months of planning and communication systems that allowed coordination across miles of battlefield in complete darkness. The destruction of Troy was equally systematic. Archaeological evidence shows that the city didn't fall to random violence, but to organized demolition designed to ensure that Troy could never again threaten Greek commercial interests. Key buildings were targeted for specific destruction. The harbor installations that controlled access to the Dardanelles, the warehouse districts that stored goods from across the known world, and the administrative centers that coordinated Troy's far-flung trading empire. This wasn't conquest, it was economic execution. The human cost was staggering beyond anything the Bronze Age world had previously witnessed. Traditional warfare involved brief campaigns with limited casualties, but Troy's destruction consumed an entire generation of warriors from across the Mediterranean. Greek casualty lists, preserved in later historical sources, suggest that some city-states lost more than half their adult male population. Trojan losses were even more catastrophic, with archaeological evidence indicating that the city's population declined by over 90% between the siege's beginning and end. The war's aftermath revealed consequences that neither side had anticipated. The destruction of Troy didn't establish Greek dominance over Mediterranean trade routes. It destroyed the trading system entirely. Without Troy's mediating influence, commercial relationships that had sustained Bronze Age civilization for centuries simply collapsed. Archaeological evidence shows dramatic declines in trade volume, technological regression as specialized knowledge was lost, and the abandonment of major settlements across the eastern Mediterranean. The ripple effects were civilizational. The Mycenaean kingdoms that had united to destroy Troy found themselves unable to maintain their military expenses without Trojan wealth. Within a generation, most Greek palaces were abandoned, their bureaucratic systems collapsed, and their populations scattered. The Hittite Empire, deprived of its Western trading partner, began a decline that would culminate in its complete disappearance from history. Egypt, cut off from its northern trade routes, entered a period of isolation and stagnation that would last for centuries. The Dark Age that followed Troy's destruction wasn't simply a period of cultural decline, but a direct consequence of Bronze Age warfare's evolution beyond the economic systems that had created it. The military innovations developed during the Trojan War had made warfare so expensive and destructive that victory became indistinguishable from defeat. The Greeks had won their war, but in doing so, they had destroyed the civilization that made their victory meaningful. Modern archaeological techniques have revealed the war's most chilling legacy. Chemical analysis of soil samples from the Trojan plain shows evidence of systematic burning that created a layer of ash extending for miles around the city. This wasn't collateral damage from urban warfare, but deliberate environmental destruction designed to ensure that the region could never again support a major settlement. The Greeks had discovered that total war meant total destruction, not just of enemy armies, but of the very landscape that sustained enemy civilization. The final irony was that Troy's destruction solved none of the problems that had motivated the war. Greek control of the Dardanelles lasted less than a generation before new powers emerged to fill the vacuum. The economic advantages that Greece had sought to gain through military conquest disappeared along with the trading networks that had made them valuable. The Bronze Age world that had produced the Trojan War didn't survive its conclusion. Yet from this catastrophic collapse would emerge something unexpected. The foundations of a new kind of civilization that would learn to channel warfare's destructive potential into the creation of institutions, technologies, and cultural achievements that would define the Western world for the next 3 millennia. The truth about the Trojan War reveals something far more profound than Homer's tale of gods and heroes. What really happened on the plains of ancient Troy was the birth and death of a way of warfare that would fundamentally reshape human civilization. The Greeks who sailed home from Troy's burning ruins carried with them military innovations that would echo through history. Systematic siege warfare, coordinated international campaigns, psychological operations, and the terrifying realization that war could be made so devastating that victory itself became meaningless. Archaeological evidence has shown us that the real Trojan War was simultaneously more brutal and more sophisticated than any ancient poet dared imagine. The bronze weapons, the massive fortifications, the underground tunnel networks, and the systematic destruction of economic infrastructure represent a quantum leap in military technology that wouldn't be matched until the Roman legions perfected the art of conquest 3 centuries later. But perhaps most importantly, Troy demonstrated that Bronze Age civilization had evolved weapons of war that were too powerful for the societies that created them. The war's true legacy isn't found in the heroic tales of individual warriors, but in the stark lesson that technological advancement without corresponding social evolution leads inevitably to self-destruction. The same metallurgical skills that created beautiful bronze sculptures also forged weapons capable of ending civilizations. The same mathematical knowledge that built Troy's magnificent walls also enabled their systematic demolition. The same diplomatic networks that facilitated peaceful trade also made possible the coordination of devastating military campaigns. Modern parallels are impossible to ignore. Just as Bronze Age societies developed military capabilities that exceeded their wisdom to control them, we live in an era where technological advancement outpaces our institutional capacity to manage its consequences. The Trojans and Greeks created weapons of mass destruction relative to their time, then discovered that using those weapons meant destroying the very world they sought to dominate. Their experience offers a sobering reminder that military victory achieved through total war can be indistinguishable from civilizational suicide. The archaeological record shows us that Troy's destruction wasn't an isolated tragedy, but the beginning of a cascade of collapse that ended the Bronze Age itself. Within 2 centuries of Troy's fall, the Mycenaean palaces lay in ruins, The Hittite Empire had vanished from history, and the sophisticated trading networks that had connected 3 continents had dissolved into scattered fragments. The Dark Age that followed lasted for centuries, during which humanity lost crucial technologies, abandoned major settlements, and forgot how to write. Yet from this collapse emerged something unprecedented. Civilizations that had learned to institutionalize conflict rather than simply weaponize it. The Greek city-states that eventually rose from Bronze Age ashes developed concepts of citizenship, democracy, and rule of law precisely because they had witnessed what happened when military power operated without social constraints. The Romans, who would later dominate the Mediterranean, created legal and administrative systems specifically designed to channel warfare's destructive energy into constructive imperial governance. The real lesson of Troy isn't that war is inevitable or that military technology inevitably destroys those who create it. The lesson is that every civilization faces the choice between developing wisdom to match its weapons or repeating the Bronze Age pattern of brilliant innovation followed by catastrophic collapse. The Greeks and Trojans possessed all the technical skills necessary to create a lasting peace, but they lacked the institutional frameworks to make peace more profitable than war. 3,000 years later, we face essentially the same choice with exponentially higher stakes. Our weapons are infinitely more powerful than bronze spears and limestone walls, but our capacity for wisdom, restraint, and cooperative governance hasn't evolved at the same pace. The Trojan War offers us a mirror in which we can see both humanity's incredible capacity for innovation and our persistent tendency to use that innovation for self-destruction rather than collective flourishing. Stories like the Trojan War remind us that the past isn't a distant curiosity, but a laboratory where we can study the eternal human struggle between our capacity to create and our compulsion to destroy, and perhaps find wisdom enough to choose creation over catastrophe in our own critical moment in history. If you made it this far and haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe now, hit that like button, and share in the comments what you think about how Bronze Age warfare compares to modern conflicts. Until the next video.